Syria.
Hi, folks. I just wanted to double check. Erica asked to start recording. I just wanted to double check that that is what you were wanting prior to the session starting.
Very correct, Peter.
Yes.
If you could just keep on going, I can hear the French translation, and I would just want to hear the Spanish one as well. So please, if anyone can just do a little intro to just to make sure that it is working with Spanish translation, that would be really helpful.
We also have 2 minutes left here if you guys want to try.
I think we have a very shy crowd here.
So we can check the technical language. The image behind me is remote sensing picture, the image of center pivots in Georgia. So you can see how these center pivots are popping up in recent years. I mean, 10 years ago, there was nothing. And then now there's a huge number of them being developed on commercial front. So,
And the image behind me is what still needs to be developed.
I think is it developed well enough for vocals. We can sing that.
Yeah, so I think both the French and the Spanish translation is working. So good luck with your event. And Rick here from Pathable Support will help you with any technical issues. And have a great event. Enjoy. Bye.
All right, hello everyone, and welcome to our event. Thank you so much for being here with us. The overall theme of this 3-part event is the value of water for agriculture and how to improve its management and performance. Here's what to expect today. So first, we will talk about the Irrigation Operator of the Future Toolkit. Second, we will demonstrate how remote sensing innovations can be used to benchmark irrigation performance. And third, we will discuss a framework for irrigation and drainage service delivery performance in Europe and Central Asia. Please note that live interpretation is available in both French and Spanish. We really hope you engage with our presenters in this session by sharing your questions and thoughts in the chat. There will be 3 Q&A sessions during the event, at which time we will address the questions. So without further ado, Amal Tabi will now share her opening remarks. She is currently the global lead for water and agriculture with the World Bank's Water Global Practice.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you everyone for joining this session on water for agriculture, triggering a quantum leap in performance. We will be looking at tools for irrigation performance, benchmarking and assessment. With increased uncertainty for irrigation from impacts of climate change, aging infrastructure, or fiscal constraint, there's really a need now for significant improvement in management and performance of irrigation to deliver its full potential. When we look, for example, at the water supply and sanitation sector, there are operational tools and indicators for performance that have been widely used and for many years. So we see that sector that have been using this type of approach to really help the operators to see where they are and where they want to be. So really projecting what they want to be in the future. So building on this experience and technological development, the speakers today will present different type of performance assessment for irrigation to support the operator to provide a better service while improving the agricultural water management and conserving the resource. These assessments integrate innovative technologies. They include operational indicator within the context of climate change and required natural resources stewardship, inclusion, and customer orientation. As you can see, we will hear about the Irrigation Operator of the Future Toolkit. And we will look in terms of geography of a wide range. So Central Asia, we'll look at Albania, Tajikistan, Georgia, Ukraine, and India. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amal. We will now hear from Jonathan Dennison and Ranu Sinha as they present on Irrigation Operator of the Future Toolkit. Jonathan is a water resources and irrigation specialist working in applied research and program planning for the World Bank and the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. Ranu is an irrigation and drainage specialist in the Europe and Central Asia region of the World Bank.
Thanks, Lauren and Amal, and greetings, everyone. I'm really pleased to be presenting the Irrigation Operator of the Future Toolkit, or the IOF Toolkit, on behalf of the World Bank and the AFAD team, who have put it together over the last year. Go next. We're all acutely aware not only of the wave of current extreme droughts, but the shifting cross-sectoral priorities and changes in water allocations to irrigation over the last decades. Increasingly, operators have had to deliver better services under a triple squeeze: less water, declining infrastructure condition, and with reduced financial resources. The toolkit was prepared to support operators to assess, to reset their vision, and take action to perform in this dynamic reality, and with a clearer and more strategic vision of their role into the future. The toolkit is inspired by the water services sector utilities of the future, which is well established, developed over 15 years, and the World Bank Governance and Irrigation Drainage Resource Book. Next. So the IOF is aimed for operators across the world, but with an emphasis on developing countries. Operators could be state or private sector. They could be managing medium or large schemes, but typically greater than 1,000 hectares, and they would employ professional staff. The toolkit is not designed for farmer-managed schemes. So it covers most, but not all of the typical operational functions. Irrigation and drainage service, asset projects ownership, environmental management are covered, but peripheral functions like land administration, agricultural support services, etc., are not yet, I can say, included. Next. So delivering services on an irrigation scheme depends on many factors, which are obviously highly varied across the schemes, regions, and timelines. So the toolkit is framed on a set of drivers, which are at the bottom of the pyramid, that lead to a set of results at the top of the pyramid. At the base is the external environment, and then in the center is the operator itself, their organization, their assets, and their systems. At the top of the pyramid are the irrigation and drainage services that result from their actions and systems. And there are at the very top of the agricultural and environmental outcomes. And there are also feedback loops where things like the environmental impact or water price feed back into the way that they operate, but we don't have time for that. There are 4 future dimensions which cut across everything, and these are innovation, inclusion, market orientation, and resilience. And these are really the future-looking characteristics of the toolkit. So in terms of making this reality workable, there are 2 sort of conceptual instruments that we use. The one are indicators, which help answer the question, how are we performing and where are the problems? And then the other is capability. And the concept of capability, which relates to the operator's organization, assets and systems, and the external environment, helps answer the question, what can we do better? So we're going to explore these two ideas in the next few slides. Next. So the process takes place in 3 rounds, if you like. In round 1, the idea is to identify the problems and the indicators are key. The second is to define a vision of the future and prioritize the actions. And here, capability is key. The final round is more conventional, perhaps, and that's about costing out options and making 100-day or 3 or 5-year plans. Next. So in round 1, a lot of the work shifts around, is focused around indicators. There's a suite of practical indicators, which is kind of a short list, 18 in total. And the idea is to choose those that talk to the operator's main problems. They cover 4 different scales: the wider scale beyond the scheme, farm, and organizational scale. Next. So data is collected on these. You can click again. The data can be collected from qualitative sources, from records, from fieldwork, or from remote sensing. And click again. The results are reflected graphically to inform the performance assessment and the problem identification discussions. So these feed into the discussions in round 1, arriving at what are our key problems and how well or not so well are we doing. Next. So in round 2, the discussion shifts to what can we do to function better. And here we rely on this idea of capability. And capability involves a set of characteristics, which are the circles on the left. And they describe the ability or the freedom to act. The organizational progression itself, the increasing capability is relatively simple. It's a 5-stage improvement trajectory from an emerging developing organization to a highly functional and dynamic innovating organization. Next. So the capability discussions are facilitated through a comprehensive information set in the toolkit that relates to 117 topics that an operator might be interested in making a change. It cuts across all of their functional areas and the external environment. And for each topic of interest, the idea is to identify where are they now in terms of their current capability status and where do they want to be. So we're going to just show a quick example. If you click, the 2 topics are shown below. The bottom one is around management of water shortages. So in discussion, the operator might decide that they are at the point at implementing stage. In other words, they monitor their water resource, but they don't use those results to allocate. And they decide they want to jump to an advancing level where they use that monitoring to inform allocations. And also they want to innovate. They want to be thinking about climate change impacts. So these desired jumps in capability translate to actions. And that's the step into the last round, which is the prioritization of actions. Next. So in the final round, that back one, the actions are prioritized based on impact and effort. Back one more. Pragmatic realism is brought to bear, and here the options are costed out, and we ask, are these acceptable to those involved? Will the decision makers support these actions? Do we have the ability to carry them out? And from there, a 100-day action plan and 5-year plan are structured. And then all of this is packaged in the next slide. You can see is packaged into a narrative guide. And this is the last one. Basically a guide, a 30-page guide, a PDF, easy to read, which has got the process and the facilitation techniques. And then the more detailed body of operational knowledge is embedded in the spreadsheet with the indicators and the capability progressions. Ranu is next going to show how the IOF was used in the initial field tests. And just to say finally that the full piloting is planned for this next year, and we're very keen to get engaged with potential operators. We have a number on stream who would be willing to work with the team on this. Thank you, and over to you, Ranu.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and thank you to Stockholm World Water Week for this opportunity. As Jonathan mentioned, the first thing we wanted to do was really test the relevance of the tool in real time, to really ground truth the tool but the beta version of the tool. So before it becomes a fully advanced tool, we wanted to even do an initial field testing. And we did this in 2 countries, Tajikistan and Albania in the Europe and Central Asia region. And first of all, the main objective was, of course, to test its relevance. It doesn't make sense to operators as it is structured and designed today. And of course, it's also for us to understand from a World Bank perspective, how is irrigation management and what are the key challenges that irrigators are facing in these 2 countries. Next, please. So, before I move into the findings of the pilots, what we really try to do is try to understand which areas, which pilot sites do we select within the 2 countries. So first, we needed to have infrastructure that's actually functional. We ended up selecting irrigation schemes where we knew that the World Bank had made some investments to upgrade, modernize, rehabilitate certain parts of irrigation systems, which ensure that there is at least reliability of the water supply to where the tool would be tested with the operator. Next is, of course, there has to be interest and engagement and willingness for an operator to go through this process. And this is, again, a reason we selected certain schemes where we had previous engagement, where the World Bank had been operating, and operators were open and willing to go through this first stage pilot. The level of complication was also important. We wanted to ensure that an operator was not managing too large of an area or too large number of schemes, so that we could easily, within the time that we had to do the pilot, understand the challenges and context of that area. The significant size, again, size also matters in terms of the structure of the department. So does the district have a qualified number of staff that are dedicated for irrigation management? Are they doing different types of activities? So that was also important to look at. Location was important for us to be able to easily access the sites. And then the representation of the irrigation issues. The way that the pilot was structured was not the full tool that Jonathan has described, but really more focused on this round 1 and round 2, which was first going in, diagnosing the problems, understanding performance indicators, doing data collection, and then speaking to the operators about the more core problems. Where are they today and what are their priority issues that they want to tackle, as well as which maturity indices are relevant for them. Next slide, please. First, on Albania, what the group did was first to understand the context and the national irrigation framework in the country. Albania has a large-scale ministry for agriculture and rural development that really sets the policy, but then is also a highly decentralized system where there are river basin authorities, there's a drainage and irrigation authority that handles main canals and large-scale reservoirs and flood protection systems, and then there's river basin authorities, 6 river basin agencies to be exact, and there's municipalities that are really in charge of irrigation and drainage, rehabilitation, operation, maintenance at the municipal level. We selected the municipality of Divjaka, which has a scheme 2 irrigation schemes that were relevant for the pilot. Together make up 2,700 hectares. Part of the system was in fact modernized with a pressurized irrigation system, and part of the system is still traditional gravity-fed irrigation. And a mix of crops are being grown, both cereal and high-value crops, but there's this introduction of vegetable production and higher value production in this area, which made it suitable to understand and test the tool. Now, some of the key issues in the context phase and the knowledge understanding of the key problems facing the institutions and the irrigation sector in Albania really already emerged from that first step, which was to show that the municipalities are really struggling with weak capacity. They don't have dedicated irrigation drainage staff. They don't have the ability to manage their own operation maintenance funding. The infrastructure, also there's a large scale of deteriorated infrastructure which was handed over to them, still in a dilapidated state, which is very difficult for municipalities to be able to upgrade. This also links to the low level of irrigation tariffs, and cost coverage is still very difficult in some of these areas. This also, of course, has the vicious cycle of the deteriorated tariff infrastructure, low tariffs, poor cost recovery, and then leading to a poor cost quality of service. So these are some of the key findings that the tool was able to highlight in their discussions. Next, please. On Tajikistan, we selected the Zarafshan River Basin as the key pilot area for intervention of the tool. And first, to understand that there is a national entity in Tajikistan, the Ministry of Energy and Water Resources, and also the National Agency of Land Reclamation Irrigation that is really responsible for irrigation services in the country, ALRI. And they're also, like Albania, decentralized and have river basin authorities. But this is an ongoing reform process, so there's only a few that are currently operational and effective. What we did was select the Zarafshan River Basin, where a district unit, so there's an operator in place, and that operator is managing a 14,500 hectare scheme. That scheme is also similar to Albania, has a mix of cereals and vegetables. And there are similar issues in Albania that were flagged by the tool in the process. Was the institutional reform process is still ongoing. It is very much still early days. There is issues of large-scale on-farm irrigation inefficiencies, large-scale leakages, and tariffs again are a challenge, as well as a deteriorated infrastructure. Next slide, please. And this is my last slide. I'll conclude here. What we did was it actually not only helped us to understand the challenges that these countries are facing, and specifically the operators themselves. The tool was really useful for that. But then the lessons that we learned for the implementation of the tool were really eye-opening. And that led to a several set of lessons that are coming out even at this initial field testing stage. Was that the engagement process, first of all, the context understanding and the trust building that is required is fundamental. You cannot ignore that. And that really requires a combination of the experts from a global perspective who understand the tool, but really to rely on local experts that have the trust of the operator, that understand the knowledge and the challenges that the irrigation sector is facing. So this was fundamental to conduct prior to the mission. There was, and secondly, was to understand that some of the IOF tabs have to be adapted to local context. For example, again, the point on the trust, but this has to be done step by step. Some activities prior to arriving and some while even on the fly to build that flexibility in. The performance indicators, for example, for some of them were not relevant and they could not be defined in the local context, so they had to be dropped. The second point was data availability. Poor data availability meant that several indicators could not be used because simply the data was not available. So there has to be this process of being able to adapt the tools for that. Last, to conclude my last few points, is that the stage one of problem prioritization probably comes too early in the tool, and that needs to come a bit later. And in terms of time, more time is absolutely needed in the pilot. So these are some quick learnings. Happy to share more information later in the session. Thank you very much. Over to you, Lauren.
Thank you so much, Ranu and Jonathan. So we will now have an opportunity for a Q&A with Ranu and Jonathan focused on the presentations. Please feel welcome to share your questions in the chat. We'd love to have you engage with our speakers and the topics. So to start, we have one question, which is one would expect that the operator starting point could have different priority interests. Could you comment on the different priorities in the pilot cases, Ranu?
Yeah, so I mentioned this quite quickly, but I think it was important for each of the contexts to understand, first of all, what that river basin or that operator's priorities in terms of hydrological challenges, in terms of political issues. So these are priorities that came up. And what we found was that they immediately wanted to jump to the solutions that are related to their local context priorities. So what the tool allows is a process of obviously trying to understand problems at the very early stage instead of prioritizing based on local context. So I think that led to some challenges. For example, I don't know if Jonathan, you want to jump in a little bit more here, but in Albania, they already understand that municipalities are really struggling with low numbers of staff. that are not able to handle the large influx of the schemes and also to supply to the water users, because water user associations were disbanded. So this has been quite a challenge, is the weak capacity of the municipal level staff in Albania. And that was a priority for them that came up immediately. So that in that sense, I think the tool has to have that flexibility built in, like I mentioned, and that in fact, understanding the context, building the trust with the local officials is actually really the first stage, and then prioritizing the problems that are occurring need to come at a secondary later stage. Last point I want to make is, in terms of priorities, what we learned that was really important was that individual conversations with staff was much more powerful in the early stages of the discussions and workshops, rather than a large collective workshop where everyone had to flag concerns, or where are we now, where do we want to be, what are the problems we're facing. It's found that didn't really work very well, where smaller one-to-one individual conversations really unearthed some of the challenges that the staff are facing, the operators are facing. Jonathan, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think the starting point is that there is an operator who has a problem. The idea is not to come in and do kind of benchmarking across a national selection of schemes. The idea is to respond to the headaches that the scheme operators or that the political leadership is having, and engage with those specific problems and then work with the team. So the entry points are invariably going to be very different. In Albania, it was around the decentralization policy that was taking effect, with effectively irrigation management transferred to the municipalities, who had not done that, even though they'd done water services, and that was a whole new role for them. So what did that mean in terms of the operational reality? In Tajikistan, they've got a critical problem with infrastructure condition, very dilapidated infrastructure condition, and terrifically high pumping costs that basically make much of the irrigation enterprise financially unviable. So you've got, very different starting points in terms of what is the real headache that the schemes are, that the leadership or the people who's sitting with the responsibility to operate these schemes in different states are looking at. And the whole point of the RIF is to embark on a process, a structured process, to help resolve those.
One point maybe I just want to add, Lauren, to complement what Jonathan has said. Both cases, I think, really shed light on the fact that these are multi-tier entities, right? There's a national level, there's regional bodies that have a role to play, and then there's the operator level actors. And in both cases, the prioritizations differ at these different multi-level scales of the organizations, and which impact the outputs and outcomes of the operator's ability to manage that system. So I think that prioritization also does, to a certain extent, need to take into account these systems that are multi-tiered, and the prioritization or the understanding of the challenges at these various levels.
Thank you, Ranu. We have another question, which is for both speakers, which is there a role for a farmer in the process?
Well, I take that one. So yes, absolutely yes. So the starting point is to speak to the different stakeholders who have a stake in the scheme, and that would be from the CEO down to a person who's drawing canal drawing water from the canal for washing clothes, for example. So there would be a full range of engagements, and the depth that one can go, it depends on what kind of resources do you have for an investigation. If there's substantial budget and time, then one can engage in a lot more comprehensive discussions. But in terms of the farmers, they're obviously a critical user. In terms of level of service, like how reliable is the water, how adequate, is it timely? These are key performance parameters. And if the whole intention of the RIF is to improve service levels to farmers so that they can farm with less risk, and more profitably, then the farmer is obviously key. And so too the technical staff, the financial personnel, the political leadership, the district politicians, everybody who has an influence on the scheme, because schemes usually have many people with fingers in the pie, so to speak.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So we have another question from a member. What is the level of effort to use the tool? Ranu and Jonathan, any thoughts?
Yeah, should Jonathan, maybe I'll start and then hand over to you. So like the point on time that I mentioned, I think, there is a high level of effort and it depends. So I think the tool is designed that it can be rapid. It can be a quick diagnostic based on existing data that the country has or has done, or at the operator level, or it can be a deep dive where you spend a lot more time on the ground. You do a lot more qualitative style interviews. And then the point on the farmers is very relevant. You spend time talking to those customers or the clients of the operator. So I think it's designed in that way. And I think from the lessons that we learned from the pilot, at least I'll speak from that perspective, the question of time and effort came up quite a bit, that there is much more time that needs to be designed upfront in putting effort into building trust, understanding the context, and then being able to really adapt the process of the tool itself, the stages, the various indicators that are relevant. That takes time and effort. So I would say that that's an important point, but it's linked to the key things that you have to do on the ground before you get into the workshop stages and the various rounds, and the things that you do after. Jonathan, I don't know if you want to complement.
Yeah, let me follow on. So when we were doing the groundwork, we drew heavily on the utilities of the future, which had a 15-year history of development. And we spoke to some of the more senior colleagues who were involved in that. And some of them would said, no, I can go for 2 days, I can speak to the operator and very quickly I can come up with what is needed. But I mean, what we're thinking of and what's come out of our process is something that's much more measured, and it's a combination of listening to stakeholders and giving information to prompt a different way of seeing things. And we've got some information coming in on remote sensing later, which is part of that, which can be tabled in the discussions. So in terms of time, how much time is needed, we would foresee some prep time, desk work, getting some initial indicators in place, probably at least a week of work, so that the facilitators engage with the scheme leadership and with other stakeholders with a decent amount of base information, and then at least a week on the scheme, or 2 weeks perhaps, as depending on size, and then a gap, a period of some weeks to a month, where data can be collected by the teams in the ground, and that would be the operators, people themselves, or perhaps consultants who are involved. And that data then comes back into the series of more detailed engagements, which are saying, okay, what do these performance indicators tell us about our current status? Where are we at? Where are our weaknesses? And that jumps into those rounds of discussions, basically problem identification, and then going into how do we make the changes, and that's the capability. So we would see, a process of at least 3 to 4 weeks of time input, and depending on scheme size, I mean, it could be substantially more to get detailed action plans with feasibility studies and cost estimates. Obviously, one would be looking at a lot more effort.
Okay, great. Thank you so much to the audience for the excellent questions, and to our speakers for engaging with everyone and for the excellent presentations. So we're now moving to part 2, where we will deep dive into using Earth observation tools to benchmark irrigation performance during this second part with IJsbrand Jejong and Pulat Karimi. IJsbrand is based in Jakarta as the World Bank's lead water resources specialist for Indonesia. And prior to joining the World Bank, he held several positions in the fields of irrigation, water resources management, and rural development with multiple stakeholders. Poulad is a senior irrigation specialist with the World Bank and leads work on water accounting and remote sensing for water and agriculture. Poulad and IJsbrand, over to you.
Thank you, Lauren, and greetings everybody from Jakarta. Thanks to CV for giving us this opportunity to talk about the use of remote sensing for irrigation performance. And we have rolled this out in India. We've done some pilots in India, so we will give some examples from India. Next slide. Remote sensing has, of course, been there for quite a while now. So in the past 20 to 30 years, we have all become used to these colorful pictures and maps of irrigated areas with red and blue and yellow. And I'm sure that some of you will even have this kind of map on your wall, including myself. And so the purpose of this presentation is not to share with you what a great tool remote sensing is, because we are familiar with that. I think what we would like to do in this presentation is to take the next step beyond the measurement of pixels and to move from measuring pixels to monitoring scheme performance, irrigation scheme performance. And we do that by measuring and comparing actual evapotranspiration, potential evapotranspiration, and relative evapotranspiration in different seasons and in different parts of the irrigated area, and then aggregate these pixel values across the project area and over time in a way that is more operational than what we have seen so far in remote sensing images. And the purpose of this is really to help irrigation operators get a good impression of their scheme and see where the problem areas is, so that they can take action and resolve the problems that have occurred. We believe it is a game changer. We believe that because of the use of remote sensing, we can much better measure and monitor irrigation service delivery. And we can also benchmark that. We can benchmark different canals within an irrigation system, but we can also benchmark different irrigation schemes at the regional or national level. And we can even benchmark countries on the basis of their irrigation performance. And we also believe it is a game changer because it is the first step in the introduction of more accountable irrigation management and performance-based irrigation management. Next slide. So what are these irrigation performance indicators? Now we have identified 10 of them, and they are sitting in three different buckets. First bucket is cost-effective and equitable access to irrigation water. Second one is productive use of water. And the third one is the adequate and reliable availability of water for ecosystems. In the first bucket, we have 3 performance indicators: water savings potential, equitable delivery of water, reliability of service. And then in the second bucket, we have scheme utilization, cropping intensity, crop water productivity, and resilience to water stress. And in the last bucket, we have seasonal water stress, water shortage, and sustaining the water balance. And all these indicators have been chosen in such a way that they can be monitored through remote sensing. Next slide. So some key characteristics of this methodologies. In the first place, it is output-based. We are not measuring the performance of irrigation by measuring the financial outlays to the system or the number of staff based in a system. We are really looking at the output of the irrigation system. The approach, the methodology is very cost effective. We are using open source data that can be freely accessed, and the approach is much more reliable and accurate than what was previously done in performance assessment, when we had to collect data by hand and with a very low granularity. Now the data collection has a very high granularity and is almost real time. As I mentioned earlier, it allows for benchmarking across different parts of an irrigation system, but also between different irrigation systems and countries. It is not comprehensive, obviously. Irrigation performance involves much more than these 10 indicators. For example, financial management indicators are also an important performance indicator for irrigation, but sadly we cannot measure that through remote sensing. And one other option is that we can share the monitoring data through a smart app that then can be used by water users, by farmers, to monitor themselves the performance of the irrigation system and to monitor themselves how their field, how their plot is doing relative to other plots. On the right hand of this slide, you see the irrigation schemes in India where we have rolled out the analysis, and I will get back to that in a second. Next slide, please. Just two examples. So on the equitable delivery, so we measure here the water consumption uniformity across space and time, and we do that by measuring the coefficient of variation across the spatial units of the plot, and it can be at different levels. Next slide. And for water savings potential, we measure the difference in consumptive water use between farms in the same area that produce the same yield under the same climatic and soil conditions. So some farms you will see have a very low water use while producing the same amount of produce, and other farms have a much higher water use, and so the water savings is the aggregate between these two. Next slide. So for these 10 irrigation systems in India that I was talking about earlier, we did the full analysis of the 10 indicators. I won't go through this whole table, but just as an example to show you how we can use it for benchmarking between these 10 systems. This is what I would like to share with you. And now over to Poulad. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ijsbrand, and hi everybody. Thank you very much for joining us in this session. What I would like to share with you is two more examples. So basically, what we have basically the concept that just Ijsbrand explained. We are looking at it from what we call water counting, and then how water counting from across the scale, from basically national level down to the field level. So we met all these scales can be stitched together to give us information basically on very key components, such as how much water is used, what is the level of the service, where we can get the improvement, where do we invest, what is the level of the productivity, how we can improve the system, because that is basically what is missing in our thinking about investments, because at the end of the day, we would like to improve a system. And to understand that, we first need to kind of pinpoint the problem, as Jonathan mentioned in the beginning. All this toolkit is trying to understand what are the problems and what are the solutions. And doing so is very easier or possible these days with remote sensing. It offers kind of low-cost solution, very efficient, self-evolving, and all the other elements that helps us to kind of bridge the data gaps that we used to have. Next, please. So the first example is from Georgia. What we have done in Georgia, basically the first steps to do the country scale analysis at what we call rapid water counting. Doing so, it's a quick process. You actually use the available global data without going into much to produce your own original data to do the quick analysis. This is kind of a diagnostic part of the work. So basically do this quick analysis. You understand what are the issues, what are the main issues, help with the dialogue, help bring forward to the stakeholders, to the sector, to the ministries, what are the issues to be focused on. For instance, in Georgia, one of the issues you see is actually that in the graph that you see, groundwater table is dropping so fast. Well, also you see that there's blue water scarcity in the regions towards the basically southeast. That information kind of helps to understand and pinpoint where we should focus next. On the top of that, next, we created a deep dive water counting tool. This is basically a zoom in using machine learning, using the most advanced approach in cloud computing, and trying to bring all the information from the national scale down to the field scale. This is where we are using the computational power, where we're using the new tools, and then how we are going to actually go from the country scale down to the field level and down to the scheme level. For instance, in Georgia, we applied this. We have done for 20 schemes. We have in discussion with the Ministry of Environment and Agriculture. We actually pinpointed those and done the performance evaluation on different categories to understand what is the level of performance in these schemes. Next, please. This is the output of the such tool. So basically, you see you're looking at the tool at a basically country level, where all this interactive interface is available. Data is being basically shared, being visualized. You can play with the layers. For instance, now what you're looking at is the crop map. of this scheme, which is Zema-Alazanis in Georgia. You can see what is the portion of irrigated area, because within the irrigated scheme, even there are areas that are not being irrigated for multiple issues. So black here is the areas that within the scheme are receiving irrigation, are actually being irrigated, but the crop area is beyond that. So which also already shows that the scheme utilization or delivery of the service of irrigation to the entire scheme is not to the basically to the 100%. Basically, this kind of tool also allows you to do the statistic on the cloud. So you can actually see based on the crop map that you're developing, which is a dynamic one for multiple year, what level of the evapotranspiration you have. You can actually compare with different maps that you have. You can choose different areas. As you see there, these are the different regions in Georgia. You can use different service providers. This is Kakheti region, and we're focusing in and zooming in one area. You see that this level of basically possibility to shift across the scale is going from the field level to this level, where you can see basically all the information at the field level down to the national level, gives us quite a bit of possibility to kind of see all these things integrated. Next, please. And here, where we actually have basically showing that how that is used for scoring the scheme, where we should focus on and what's the average score. Next, please. And in Ukraine, we have done the similar application, and you see in Ukraine, there are most of the areas that are irrigated happen to be in the ongoing conflict zone. And there we are actually focusing and seeing what are the impacts of the conflict, how it's affecting the situation. Next, please. And also looking into basically, I mean, already you can see the early results shows that in the conflict area, there is reduction of NDVI, which is an indication of the reduction of the yield that comes to at the later stage in September. But these are early results, so we're continuing to work on this. Next, please. And this is kind of shows where areas as to climate change, we have increased water scarcity in the future. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for the excellent presentations. So we will now have another Q&A session with our speakers. So we welcome your questions now and anytime. And we look forward to hearing from you on the Pathable chat. So we do have one question. Would the speakers be able to talk about undeniability, real-time adaptability, forcing discussion that is traditionally rather avoided and thus links with IOF and its improvement planning?
Yeah, I can speak to that, and then Poulad can also come in. Just the importance of this, and I tried to mention it in the presentation, but I think it is really important to emphasize is that irrigation traditionally has been an area, a business that has been pretty much without much accountability. And what this tool is doing is that it is helping irrigation become more accountable for the results that they produce. These results that you can measure and monitor through remote sensing. And so the way that happened traditionally was that you had to go out to the field and do some crop cuttings, and that could only be done once a year or so. And then you try to measure as good as possible the flow of water into an area, which was already very complicated. And so the reliability and the accuracy of that performance monitoring was very questionable. Now we have a tool that is low cost, real time, high granularity, and that can be very accurate, and it can be used for irrigation performance assessment. And I think the key is really to start using it to provide incentives for the use of the remote sensing, so that irrigation becomes more accountable for the results that it is producing. Back to you, Laura.
Poulad, did you want to?
Yeah, actually, as for instance, what we strive is partly is about bringing transparency. I mean, having that information, near real-time information in the season as things are happening, bring it forward and creating a dialogue, creating that basically basis that everybody could agree. And remote sensing kind of offers this possibility because it's not a specific information that coming from one agency or another. It's just the measurement that is happening independently. So it's a kind of source to help us to kind of improve that accountability and then try to improve the system in an agreeable way.
And Lauren, if I may add one thing, it is very easy to translate this data into a mobile app, as I mentioned during my presentation, and then share it with the water users, with the farmers, and then create a demand for better quality of services through that app. If farmers see that there are significant differences in the quality of services across an irrigation scheme or between their scheme and another scheme, they can start asking for a better quality of that service. So it helps you create that accountability, that transparency that Bulat is also talking about. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Another question would be, can this be scaled, for example, to other countries?
Yeah, that's a very short answer. Yes, absolutely. This can be scaled to any country in the world. It just hasn't happened yet, but we are happy to work with anyone who is willing to work with us on developing a system in their country.
Yeah, just adding to that, to what I explained, is basically what we are trying to do with the methods is basically we are trying to create tools that are replicable. So basically, once the tool is there, I mean, I showed you two sets of tools. One is the rapid water counting, which is actually a global tool. You can run it for any country already because the data is global. And then the deep dive tools, which actually have a standard kind of structure. You can take that structure and then apply it to another area, and then also tailor to the specific problem of that country or that basin, because that's also important, right? Back to the first presentations that were identified problems are important. So you have to also you have to have that flexibility to be able to tailor what you're speaking about to those problems. I didn't have much time to show my Ukraine example, for instance, but in Ukraine, we have specific problems right now that are different than, let's say, in Georgia. And through these tools, we are actually able to provide information to those specific problems. What are the water impacts? How we can improve it? What happens with water scarcity? How blue water scarcity, because of the problems with the source of water and where the water use is going to impact the future. So that flexibility becomes very important.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And a quick note to the audience that the speakers will also they'll try to answer remaining questions if we don't have time. For example, after part one and this one, they can answer in the chat. So please feel welcome to continue to engage with us, even if your questions are not addressed in this space. Right.
I think there's a question about measuring production.
Yes, so it looks like we have another question, which is, can you measure the production, the yield of crop using remote sensing data? Because water stress or low NDVI always do not mean low crop production, but crop yield is interlinked with multiple parameters such as pesticide, fertilizer, diesels. So Bulat, sounds like you're ready to answer.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you can do that, and then we are not doing that using NDVI. Basically, what we showed for Ukraine for NDVI, because we have the NDVI information sooner than what we call dry matter or DMP data, that is basically biomass production. So for the yield and information on the growth, we actually rely on biomass growth information, which comes from dry matter or NPP or GPP. So basically, those are actually take into account all those crop-specific issues. And also, we can measure the type of amount of the yield from there using the crop map and also harvest index where we have. So basically, it's possible. And we are doing it. Actually, those apps actually include those yield level information.
And just maybe a quick reminder from my side is that this approach, this methodology does require field calibration of the data. The simple collection of remote sensing data is not enough. It does require calibration of the data in the field.
Yeah, this is an excellent point there, Espen. I mean, that's why we do the rapid one, the first one without the ground information, but in the deep dive, the more ground information, the more ground truthing data that comes in, your quality of work you can actually sharply increases.
Excellent. Okay, thank you so much again to our speakers and to the audience for the great questions. We will now proceed to part 3. And this is the final part of the event, and it's presented by Regasa Namara, David Molden, and Nozilakon Mohamedova. They will focus on a new framework for irrigation management and performance in Europe and Central Asia. Regasa is a senior water resources economist at the World Bank with experience around the world. And David was previously Deputy Director General of the International Water Management Institute and Director General of the International Center for Mountain Development. And Nozila is a postdoctoral researcher with expertise around agricultural transitions in Central Asian countries, as well as water and land use and gender and social development. Regasa, David, and Nozila, we look forward to your presentations.
Okay. I will. This is David, and wonderful to speak, revisit irrigation. Could you go to the next slide, please? What we'd like to do, actually, we're developing what we're calling an ecosystem framework, and I'll get back to that, about irrigation, and then highlight its application both in Central Asia and Albania. And Nozila and Regasa will join me to do that. Next slide, please. So I feel very much irrigation is at a crossroads today. Irrigation has and will continue to contribute to food security and growth, both locally and globally. We have to pay attention to irrigation, but its potential has not been reached in many areas. Some people have talked about the outdated service models, the infrastructure, the low productivity. And in addition to that, we have other growing concerns of society about irrigation that have to be addressed: equity, inclusion, climate change, environment, and irrigation's role in water scarcity and increased competition. Next slide, please. So what is needed now is a profound transformation in the way irrigation services are monitored, managed, and delivered. And that's the topic of the seminar. But what are we missing in irrigation management? I think in the past, there's been a lot of focus on infrastructure. We will always need that infrastructure and this management. But have we given enough consideration to context, ecological, environmental, behavioral context? We often think of irrigation as large canal systems, but in fact, there's been a diversity of irrigation that have come up. Just think about groundwater use in irrigation, but also the way it's managed. That we have the government schemes, but we also have private and community schemes, and a lot of opportunities in these areas, and many actors involved and interacting. Do we take that into consideration, as well as the gender-based nuances amongst users? Are we prepared for shocks and many kinds, right? COVID-19 conflict, as well as climate change in the future. Next slide, please. So what we've tried to do is to put up a framework, and we're calling it an ecosystem framework. Yes, irrigation is a user and provider of ecosystem services, but there are many connections. It's emphasizing the connectivity across scale and system of irrigation. Just to explain the diagram, on the outer circle, we have various outcomes expected of irrigation. To the left are the traditional ones: the crop yield, food security, income, increased GDP. And then on the right side are representing the, say, new societal demands: green, inclusive, resilient development, addressing climate change, perhaps addressing poverty in new and different ways, and enhancing water security. So to address that, we need to take into consideration cross-scale interactions. So that's in the middle. the farm, the irrigation system, the regional scales. I thought the remote sensing did a wonderful job of showing some of those cross-scale interactions. Could you press the button, please, to next slide? Great. And then there are many critical systems to be considered. The IOF, for example, focused very much on irrigation and drainage delivery service system, much needed. But in addition to that, there's the agroeconomic system, right? The crops, the livestock, their marketing, the policies and institutions. World Bank has a wonderful guidebook on irrigation governance. In addition, we need to pay more attention to the ecological and hydroclimatic system and as well as social behavioral system, meaning the culture and norms, gender relationships, and knowledge systems. So what I'd like to do is hand it over to Nozila to illustrate how that works in different settings. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Yeah, as David mentioned, conventional infrastructure-based approach focuses on irrigation management and the performance of the operator. As we see on this picture, the Mirop or water master from Uzbekistan. In the framework, such approach focuses on the blue shaded area, as you can see in our framework diagram. And this is the farm meso irrigation system scales. And the main system in the target is the irrigation and drainage service delivery, along with the two other systems, as you see also shaded. Yes, we need to still strengthen our status quo target, however, recognize where are the gaps and pay attention to other scales too. And I would like to bring two cases from Central Asia, as I myself come from Uzbekistan. So next slide. The RLC catastrophe is well known to all, and the main objective was to increase the production, especially the cotton yields. During the Soviet period, irrigated areas were expanded from 2 million hectares in 1900s to 7.4 million hectares in 1980s, and the large-scale infrastructure was created. Presently, over 85% of RLC is perished, as you know. And there are significant trade-offs like this, and it is insufficient to look, for example, only on this economic drivers as the policymakers did at that time. For our framework, here we can see also the shaded areas. We see that this ecologic and climatic setting was not considered and would have been good to include. And this including this ecologic hydroclimatic system as well as cross-scale impact, such as shaded areas, the basin scale and the regional scale, and even above that, this could provide better decisions toward green, resilient development and enhance the water security. Next click. Another case indicates the need to unpack the farm scale. You know, this shaded area, the farm is here. We're not talking about only the simple group of farmers. There are multiple users and uses of water, notably home gardens that play an important role in sustaining livelihoods. It's crucial to account for social characteristics and, for example, gender aspects such as different needs and roles of men and women and diverse uses of water. Often men are in the commercial farming and women are involved in this home gardening. And meso-level operators often prioritize formal agriculture and farmers. However, home gardens are often excluded from the irrigation services provided, for example, by the water user associations that exist in Central Asia. So from this case, we can see the importance, as you see again in our framework, the social behavior system element in the framework that includes also this cultural norms, gender relations, the knowledge systems and incentives. We can also see that all shaded systems here come into play. You see them in this orange, yeah. And the climate change, for example, increasing droughts in the region make women, the small farmers, even more vulnerable. And another case is that at the farm level, we can also consider, for example, groundwater users who may not be covered by the irrigation operators. The next slide, please. The cases show clear gaps, and the ecosystem framework that we offer provides opportunities, new vision into the future of irrigation. So the next question, of course, is how to operationalize this ecosystem framework. And the further steps would be, well, they would require understanding, of course, designing for diversity and providing incentives for behavioral change from inside and outside of irrigation sector. We also need to be able to monitor with the range of indicators and advanced tools, like already mentioned in the presentation with the remote sensing, and aim for outcomes that we need to meet all these new challenges such as climate change, resilience, environmental issues, and social and gender equity. And I would pass with this note to Rigasan Amara.
Thank you very much, Nozila. Yeah, so I would like to present the case of Albania, but Albania represents the general situation of Western Balkan region. Actually, Albania is considered the dominant irrigation country, as about 50% of the total irrigated area in the Western Balkan is in Albania. So you have heard from my colleagues about the need for rethinking about the irrigation sector. The irrigation sector now, as the world moved from the Millennium Development Goals to the Sustainable Development Goals, the ask for the irrigation sector is also completely transformed. The irrigation sector need to be, development should need to be greener. It has to enhance climate resilience. It needs to be inclusive and sustainable also. For the case of Albania, the drivers for this new transformation are, the first thing is the EU accession. The EU accession requires harmonization of different sectoral, regulatory, and institutional frameworks with EU directives. The notable one, the most noted one, is the Water Framework Directive, but there are also other relevant directives that are shaping the irrigation sector, including, for example, the Groundwater Directive, the EU Green Growth Agenda, the nitrate directives. And more importantly also, with Albania positioning itself to join the EU, there is a huge increased market opportunities. They will be tapping into a 50 million people potential market. But also it exposes the Albanian irrigation sector to severe competition. So the irrigation sector cannot perform at the level it used to perform. There should be a significant leap, both in terms of its productivity and it's also in terms of its considerations for environmental considerations like reduced pollution, main point source solutions, and others. The other driving force for the rethinking about the irrigation sector, which is applicable also elsewhere, is the climate change. You know, the climate change brings also another dimension. You know, the crop water requirements will increase, and we need to take care of the water use efficiency there. But not only the water use efficiency, we need to be also mitigating the carbon footprint of the sector. The sector needs to be also reduced significantly. Another important factor is the energy cost. You know, you can see that in the advent of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, the energy cost issue is in fact becoming very serious now. The energy cost is a very significant component of the entire cost structure, and it affects the farm income. And therefore, there is no, it affects really the incentive for engaging in irrigation itself. So there is a need to rethink how to either move to a cleaner, more cheaper version or more efficient systems. Next slide, please. So what, in the context of Albania, what are these new operational frameworks we are talking about? The first thing is a proactive effort to ensure optimal use of water in irrigation. That means, for example, when we are proposing a rehabilitation or modernization agenda, we need to really think very carefully, you know, for example, as we are really doing in Turkey, for example, rehabilitating the infrastructure to its original state is not enough now. There is a need for example, converting to the extent possible, converting the open channels to the closed and pressurized system, and also the furnishing them with a prepaid water metering system so that volumetric water pricing is possible to influence the behavior of farmers to use the irrigation in a more judicious way. The other aspect is also, you know, no one, I think, will see that the irrigation is delivered only by the public system. There is a diversified irrigation service delivery model in Albania and also in Western Balkan. Actually, there is a significant growth of private irrigation, tapping into the drainage water or groundwater. And if we want to regulate or manage the sector, a focus on the public system alone will not deliver the goods. So we have to adopt a diversified model. And also, the diversified institutional models are there. As Albania is trying to align itself with the EU directives, they have embarked on significant institutional reform. And now the irrigation is mainly handled by the municipalities and by what we call also irrigation and drainage board for infrastructures that are used by 2 or more municipalities. So we have to also consider this diverse institutional architecture there. And also what has been talked by my previous colleagues is also there should be a change in performance monitoring and the metrics of success. I think the traditional focus on crop yield, income, will always generate a trade-off in terms of the wider societal goals, in terms of equity, in terms of pollution reduction, climate resilience. So we really need to also rethink about the performance monitoring. As part of this effort, for example, in our just closed project, we managed to institute what we call irrigation and drainage management information system, both at the municipality and at the ministry level. But what we found is that there was no incentive for the municipalities to really collect that information. And that brings me to the next one. We need to have innovative financing models, including performance-oriented fiscal transfers to municipalities. Now, if we adopt this kind of, if we base budget allocation to a certain performance standard by the municipalities themselves, they will be willing to furnish the required information that are useful for managing the sector. And the last one is partnerships at local and national level. I think it's very important that we go beyond the operator level and see the system as a whole. And we need to design policies and strategies that will enhance the municipalities to also deliver the societal goals, in addition to the farm income and yield related goals. So generally what we wanted to address here is the irrigation sector of today has a lot of responsibilities and has to be managed in a differently from the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ragasa and Nozila, and excellent presentations. So we have again a bit of time for some questions for the speakers, a bit less time than the last two parts. So the first question is, how do you see the linkages between the IOF tool and the ecosystem framework? You know, are they competing or compatible? Any responses or thoughts?
I think I can come in a little bit, others can join, but I think they're definitely compatible. I mean, we're going to need infrastructure, good infrastructure development. I think that the focus on operators and improving the role of improving performance, it will be absolutely necessary. That's really one of the weak links and has been for a long time. What we're trying to do in the ecosystem framework is then kind of expand to show different expected outcomes and the different influences and other areas where we might intervene into irrigation to improve performance. So to me, they're entirely compatible.
Just to add, I think there is a very tremendous, really, cross-fertilization between the two. For example, one area I see is that, like I say, the irrigation sector is more than the public sector. This is a reality. Wherever we go, whether it is in Turkey, whether it is in Albania, or whether it is in, I don't know about Central Asia, we have to see. For example, one of the contribution of the remote sensing one is actually very elegant in terms of really taking care of the sector that is not in the formal sector, you know, for which the ministry has no handle on it. So they really badly need these kind of tools to make a handle on the private sector, which are autonomously being developed.
Okay, thank you very much. We have, see, I think we have another question. And to the audience, please be welcome to ask questions. We'd love to hear them. So I believe we might have one more question. All right. Should the approach be a needs-based financing model as opposed to performance-related?
Yeah. So generally, there is a protocol. There is a, you know, when the budget allocation, the Ministry of Finance and Treasury, they have a set criteria. Most likely, the need-based is already there, the default criteria. But it has to be, in our opinion, and it worked also, for example, in the case of the urban utilities. I think there is an example that we can learn from. For example, if you put in the level of revenues generated by the municipalities from the irrigators as a criteria, for example, for topping up, you know, for increasing budget, I'm just giving an example. It could be a complement to the need-based, right? So it incentivizes municipalities to be managing their irrigation system more in line with the societal needs generally. So this is, yeah, it is possible. It's a complement. It's not really. Yeah, these are the need-based is already a default criteria in budget allocation in most cases. Yeah.
Excellent. Do any of the other speakers have thoughts to add?
That's good.
Great. And to the audience, we welcome any additional questions to any of the speakers. Okay. So we have one more question from Imran. Thank you so much for the nice presentations. I would like to know your thoughts for a green, inclusive, and sustainable irrigation approach. Do you think the Nexus approach, water, energy, food ecosystem, can be integrated into socioeconomic and institutional contexts, and is it an option?
No, Zila, or I can do that, or you want to try?
Yeah, I think definitely yes. And the framework, as you have seen, has several systems that actually incorporate also this social and social behavioral, and as I mentioned already, the cultural even aspects and the gender aspects. And we would like to be this to be more inclusive as much as possible. Yeah, that we unpack this the users group and then tackle these issues too.
And I think what that water, food, energy ecosystem nexus does is it brings in energy very much into the picture. And I think when we're addressing climate change, that's got to be something that we have to focus on more and more, as well as the ecosystem. So I think it's similar to that water, food, energy ecosystem nexus is what we're presenting here, just kind of the connectivity and the linkages.
Excellent. So we have time for one more question. Irrigation is at a crossroads and surely correct. To what extent should this quantum leap be looking to embrace radical changes, such as vertical indoor farming, or is it about doing what is being done, but just a whole lot better? Speakers, any thoughts?
I think it has to be both, right? Are there new and different things? I think that and to do certainly needs to be looked at. But then there's so much diversity, and there's actually quite a bit of innovation going on in the field. And I think one thing we need to do is to tap into that innovation that's already happening and understand that as well, because that'll often give us clues on what we need to do next to tackle even the things we are doing now better.
Excellent. Thank you so much to our speakers and to the audience again for the excellent questions and engaging with us. We will now have Peter Wallowen, a lead water resource management specialist with the World Bank's Water Global Practice, provide the closing remarks for this event. Peter?
Thank you, Laura, and thanks everybody. I mean, it's been great to see old friends, new faces, and to see all the work of the last couple of years come together for these 3 different windows that give this conceptual and also very practical, I hope, a quantum leap towards irrigation operation in the future. So I think it brings into focus what results we and governments and operators want to achieve, how we are doing, and how we can do things better, but both things that we just mentioned. But it's really also about adjusting how we assess success, and beyond the conventional engineering, beyond the efficiency and management speak, and get into the big questions of what is a good service for a farmer, what are good agricultural environmental ecosystem outcomes, and is it operable for the operator, right? Can the operator manage? And that makes these questions very relevant. Big questions for farmers, for policymakers, for the wider ecosystem, and indeed also for the planet. So we are at the crossroads of super important stuff. And this is not some theoretical or imposed concept. What we've tried to do and what we see in all these different windows we discussed today is that it's really grounded in the operational reality of the operators in irrigation, and helping them tackle these questions, go deeper and explore the possibilities as well as the impossibilities, and get consensus on the wider range of perspectives and priorities that might be there. And nowadays we have the tools that we will discuss in the second window that make it affordable for us to measure what we have to manage, to converge around solutions. So just looking forward in 1 minute, and then there you go. These tools are not exclusive, they are not World Bank trademarked, and they are available to any and all operators. And we're actually working with quite a number of them under the Global Inspire network of irrigation operators. And we're ready to support more. We have seen already a number of operators in different countries ready to jump in and to struggle with this and to improve the tool and their own operations. So some 10 countries are working on this, and we would really be keen to see if there's others who are interested to work with us on this and to get a handle on their performance as well as on the accountability for their performance. And yes, this tool is not the end all and it's not the answer to all questions. It needs vertical integration with good policy and institutional reform. Without that, without upward ring fencing and downward accountability mechanisms to farmers, it's not going to work. But it tackles an important thing, which is rather than up and downward, it's inward. And it's often overlooked. It's into the internal drivers of the operator to improve and to find solutions and be incentivized. So we are very keen, I think, all of us that spoke today and our partners. And as Amal said, these are very different, important experiences to grow the sector globally. And I think we now have a very mature paradigm that takes the sector to these new heights. So with that, we hope to see you all sleeves rolled up and into the future, very practically. Thanks all.
All right, thank you so much everyone for attending, and we hope you continue to engage with the topics and reach out with questions. So we'll now end the session. Thank you so much, everyone.